Hey church, Pastor Shane here, another community group discussion starter video. This week we are continuing in our series called Allegiance, which is focused on our allegiance to Jesus Christ as King, even as we face various challenges in our country, in our community, our culture, even our world. And we talked the first week about how being allegiant to Christ means complete devotion, complete loyalty, complete commitment to Christ as King. And there's a lot of things competing for our allegiance right now, but if we keep Christ first, then everything else kind of falls into its proper place. And the second week, we talked a little bit about the fact that being allegiant to Jesus Christ means seeing the world from his perspective, a Christian worldview, if you will. And only God has a plan to solve the problem of human sin, and any false ideology that claims to have some solution for human sin simply can't solve the problem. And so this week what we're talking about is, what do we do when we feel like we are experiencing evil, when we feel like we live in a culture that is pushing back? Like how do we respond to that? And we walk through Psalm 37, which is exactly gives us directions on how to respond to that. And David in Psalm 37 has a collection of proverbs, really, that kind of developed this idea over time. And there's kind of three main themes, kind of broke into sections a little bit as we were reading through it. That we don't have to be vexed, stressed, or obsessed, as I said in the sermon, because first, that when the evildoers, their success is going to be fleeting. It's not going to last. God will not endure it forever. And so while it may seem like they have temporary success, that success will not last. The second reason we don't have to be vexed, stressed, or obsessed as we read through this psalm is because God is ultimately with his people, and that we should have a great humility about kind of going to him. He's the one who's going to get us through, and he has a special care and attention to us. He's going to help us be allegiant to him and stick with his ways. And then the last reason is that God is sovereign over this inevitable conflict. And I think it is important to understand that some of this conflict that we are experiencing today is inevitable, that the humanity is broken, that there are those who are opposed to God and his ways, or those who are trying and learning to follow God like we are. Not perfect, but at least kind of seeking him, and that there's going to be a conflict between those, and that conflict is actually normal. If we kind of realize that conflict is normal, we can kind of acknowledge, oh yeah, this is expected. God is going to help me through this. This isn't some particularly terrible time that we're living in. We may feel it more right now, but it's actually very normal to have this kind of conflict, especially since there are forces that push back against God, and then there are those who are trying to follow him with everything that they are. And so that's why we don't have to be vexed, stressed, or obsessed with evil or evildoers that we see in our world. Not that we should ignore evil, but it doesn't have to take us over. It shouldn't distract us from doing what we're called to do, which leads me to kind of the final point that we talked about. As we read through the psalm, there is this constant pull for us to trust in God, to seek him, to make our refuge in him, and to do good. That even though evildoers may do evil, that's not what we're called to. We are called to do good. And so I kind of want to leave everyone with this idea that pops up right in the beginning in verse, right in the opening verses of the psalm, to trust God and do good. That is what we're called to this day. And while there's more to talk about with our interaction with our culture and society in which we live in, which we're going to cover next week, sometimes we just need to kind of keep it simple. What can I do today? I could just do the right thing. I could contribute to God's kingdom. I could serve other people. I could love those even if they don't treat me well, and therefore kind of mirror the character of God. You're going to be talking a lot about that in your sermon discussion guide this week. If these questions aren't resonating with you, I have an alternative idea too. You could sit with your group and just kind of read through the psalm together and like pick out individual verses to really kind of like zoom in and focus on and really kind of pull apart together as a group. You pick 3 or 4 of those. That would be a fine discussion too. But leaders, you're going to have to do a little bit extra work ahead of time to just have some options ready to go for your group if you want to go that direction. I also in the sermon discussion guide kind of went over something that I only merely touched on. You spend a lot of time, if you're following this guide, in Luke chapter 6, where part of trusting God and doing good is loving others, even those who might hate you, even those who may push back against your faith, and how we should think about our relationship with so-called evildoers as we fulfill the call of Christ on our lives. A lot to discuss there. Make sure you leave time for that, because the Old Testament psalm doesn't go into that in much detail. But we as believers really have to acknowledge that as we try to live out what the psalm has called us to be and what this psalm has called us to do. Trust God, do good. Have a great week.